Hey everyone, welcome to the first ever episode of Genesis Theory. For those of you who are wondering what Genesis Theory is about, please check out our intro video. It's really important that you guys learn about the mission and vision I have with Genesis Theory. Moving on, our first ever guest has a super interesting background, and his story is something all of us can learn something from. So, this guest, having been fascinated or rather obsessed with entrepreneurship and businesses from an early age, started his own product development agency, which was focused on helping entrepreneurs build and launch software products with his two other friends during his sophomore year at Babson College in 2016. Unfortunately, this entrepreneurial stint was short lived, with him and his friends being forced to shut shop in 2018. His desire to learn and his boundless curiosity has allowed him to pick up a plethora of skills in the tech domain, including but not limited to him being a self-taught full stack developer. He's currently a CFA level 2 candidate and a portfolio manager at Blue Ashwa Capital, where he's focusing on deal analysis and working with the portfolio companies where he helps them with business development, etc. Please welcome the winner of Money 2020 Hackathon and my good friend Arpit Bansal to the show. सब चंगा सी कैसा है
ठीक हो यार तू बता
बस बढ़िया so just FYI the point of Genesis theory like I mentioned was to sort of bring not success into perspective but the entire process that goes into it, so taking the first step and those initial steps. So that's why I'm sort of interviewing people who have just started off or are somewhere in the early stages. So you're someone who's of course finished his entire first stint at entrepreneurship. So
sure,
this is
if you would say so.
Yeah, a small stint, but a really interesting journey. I've been through some of it, not all of it. So anyway, starting off, let's sort of roll back the years. What sort of got you pumped about starting your own business? When did your I want to become an astronaut moment turn into I want to start my own business?
It's a good question. Well, so actually, I did want to be an astronaut for a long time. Then it turned into aeronautical engineering for some reason. And then actually for the longest time, I kind of wanted to study engineering. I don't know if it was social expectations or I actually wanted to study engineering. That part is still unclear to me. But I do remember that it was something that I wanted to do and build things and whatever. But I hadn't really given thought to business really. One thing that I was sure about is I didn't want to do CA because my whole extended family, there's like a couple of people in each of my extended families who's a CA. So I wasn't into that. So I wasn't really thinking about business in general. I think the moment where I realized that this would be something fun to do that I would like to get into was, I think it was somewhere in, I want to say 10th grade when
you went for that summer school program.
I was back from school for holidays at home, and I was thinking what I want to do in the summer after 10th grade. And I remember I was going back from the airport, and I think my dad was in the car, and he's basically asking me like, what do you want to do 11th and 12th, the usual conversation. And I think at the time I was into engineering, and I was like, that's what I'll do. And I think, and again, I'm paraphrasing here because I don't exactly remember what he said, but it was something along the lines of the conversation continued and ended up with him saying that you should think about business, and the reason being that with business you can, well, the way he explained it is, if you would become an engineer in, let's say, a specific field, you will learn how to build things, but you will end up being one engineer amongst a sea of engineers, and the possibility of making larger social change is much harder in those kind of roles. If you really want to drive change in the world, figure out how you can pool together resources and bring people together and use their talents and work with them. So that was essentially what he had said. But then the I didn't fully understand it until I did the summer program at
At
Babson BV.
Babson,
And
yeah.
yeah, I mean, I think that's where it really clicked. Is this is fun. I get to work on cool things, collaborate with people, and yeah.
So let me sort of, go back to that point where you said your dad said you should, you'll be an engineer amongst a sea of many hundreds of other engineers, being in India and everything. But one of my friends back in Boston, when I was having a conversation with him, when I was telling him that, I'll be moving back to India to start my own thing, he mentioned something similar. But what he said is, the reason he started, the reason he chose business school over engineering was because he saw his brother become an engineer, and that sort of, engineering sort of gives you a really structured and logical approach towards everything. So whatever his brother tried to do was always bound by this box.
Okay.
It didn't sort of, allow him to paint outside the lines, think about different possibilities and everything. I don't know if that sort of relates to what you're saying, but it just, what your dad said about you being in a sea of engineers sort of took me back to that moment. But
Yeah, and so I think that's a part of it too. But I think there needs to be a balance, and that's what I'm realizing now. I think if you were to ask me, like back then, that was the mindset, and that probably convinced me at the time. Being able to explore and build the concept of business, and I think the environment of Babson, and I don't know what it was. It was at the time that convinced me. But now, having been through the, let's say, the business education, and still keeping alive my interest in sort of, let's say, computer science or engineering, I do see that you need the balance, because otherwise you're left with sort of a lot of you're left with good intent, like you want to do things, but then in terms of the hard skills, or I think you need that logical thinking as part of business to
yeah,
really make, like, some concrete steps towards progress. So I think a balance is required.
fair enough. So let's go back to the part where you mentioned Babson summer school. So how did that sort of convince you that this is something you definitely want to do? What part of that summer school taught you that, okay, this is something I'm really interested in? What sort of got you curious?
Okay, so let's see. So one part is definitely the environment, and I think this is true generally of apps. And
Yeah,
I think the environment, that there was the first time that I was in a place where learning was part of the experiential process. And because up until then, it was always learning in a classroom, and sort of
giving exams.
experimentation,
Yeah,
fun, whatever, was always separate. So that was the difference. But for the first time, it was fused, where I was in a room full of people, first of all, who wanted to be there. That's a big difference between being forced to go to class and
yeah,
people actually flying all around across the world to attend something. So there's
yeah,
that intent. And I think then the kind of conversations, and my first exposure to this kind of thinking, where we're not uh, we're not just learning something because it's in the curriculum, but we're learning something because it's exciting, it has some applications in the world, and the people teaching us had the experience of building value through
yeah.
business. And it was that hands-on approach. So in the summer school, we had to sort of form teams and come up with an idea. And now it seems pretty standard, right? Pitch competitions. But
Yeah,
at the time, for me, it was so new
because we
to
hadn't been through that process ever.
exactly.
Yeah,
So to come up with the concept, to collaborate with folks that I just met, and then take all those ideas and convert it into something that you can present, that could potentially create a lot of value, and sort of thinking about the different aspects, so the different problems you would have to solve. um, yeah, I think it was the creation aspect that I anyway enjoyed all my life. What essentially the creation aspect is what wanted is why I wanted to, I guess, maybe do engineering. And I mean, once I realized that the same part does also exist in business, I think that's where, I would say that's the one of the reasons why I decided this could be a fun thing to explore. And the other reason that I have to mention is that growing up, um, sort of part of my weekend, regular weekends, there would always be people who would come over come to our house, because my dad used to invest on the side, and there's this one spot in our old house, next to the window. It's like this one cushiony spot where always the entrepreneur, whoever's pitching the idea would sit there. Would be my dad, and then my dad would always have want me to sit. And at the time, I was like, "What am I doing here?"
I just want to go down and play.
Exactly, but I think it was when I combined those two things after having gone through the summer school experience, and then realizing that all the conversations we were having in the classroom I had heard before, or I had I'd
sort
been
of,
in these conversations. Yeah, so it all sort of connected. I think that's another.
So for me, I saw a massive change after pre-summer school and post-summer school. I saw a massive change in high school, and I'm going to explain exactly how. Yeah, with you.
Okay.
So for those of you who don't know, Arpit and I went to the same high school, so we've been friends for the longest time. So yeah, I'll start off with that presentation you gave about your time at Babson. That was one of the things.
I don't even remember that.
So basically, these 6 different pillars of entrepreneurship you talked about. One of them was spirituality. That's the last one, I think, and that's what I remember. But after that, you sort of seeing you working on these creative things that you just mentioned, like writing your own book.
Sure. Oh yeah.
Trying to do something with laptops with Arpit.
Yeah.
And just those sort of things, and then trying to get into programming, just learning different things. So that sort of from afar, I could see that summer school experience sort of lit this fire in you, that this desire to learn something. You were extremely curious about a lot of things after you came back.
Absolutely.
So I think that was the point where I started thinking that, oh, this entrepreneurship thing seems pretty cool, but I was always into football, so nothing really topped that sort of excitement for me. Yeah, it's come full circle. Yeah. But let's fast forward. You get to Babson, and so just 2 seconds before you get to Babson, I remember you being confused about whether you want to go to Babson or not. So why is that? Because you were getting to go to this place which sort of breeds entrepreneurs.
Yeah, no, that's definitely a real dilemma at the time. And it's not like I got into so many colleges where I had an option. But I still had to decide. And the decision at the end of the day was actually still between doing engineering and then business.
Yeah.
And which is why I think the summer school, it didn't fully sort of change my mind. I was still sort of debating which one I should do. And I think eventually what I decided was that, well, I think there's 2 aspects to the decision for me. One was the familiarity, when I knew that, I guess maybe if I'd picked something else, I would have walked into something with the clean slate, not knowing what to expect. But at least with Babson, I knew what to expect, and in a positive way. That was one. And the other thing was, and maybe this was sort of a mindset rebellion from high school, or I guess boarding school, which is having been in an environment where we were sort of,
structured, institutionalized environment. Yeah.
I wanted to be in a place where I could sort of do whatever.
And like I said, paint outside the lines. Yeah.
It was just, I really wanted to be in that gray area, and I could sort of play around and do what was exciting. And I think those things in combination,
And plus, you figured out really towards the end that this was sort of a combined course between the engineering school and the business school.
Yeah, another big reason was how close Olin College of Engineering was. Just the campuses were connected, so I knew that I'd be able to take engineering as well, which would not have been the case had I gone to an engineering school trying to find a good business class.
Exactly. Yeah. So anyway, you get to Babson, and like you said, the environment played a huge part. As soon as my earliest memory of sort of our first interaction in the US. I went to Boston University, for those of you who don't know. And our first interaction, you were already talking about, going to these startup events and everything. So I think that sort of speaks volumes about that gray area that you were talking about, where you just
Yeah,
wanted to
absolutely.
explore.
Yeah.
So that
And
also, takes me to this other point, which I mentioned earlier on about taking that first step, going from 0 to 1. So is it because you went to those, events? Is it because you went to that hackathon for your 18th birthday?
yeah.
Were those things the first steps towards Gin, your startup, or was it
Um,
after that?
okay, so I'll backtrack a bit to tell you how now in retrospect I think how it all came about is it all sort of started the summer before I we were all going to college,
Yeah.
and so I was all finally done with school and ready for the next phase. And for the first time, I was like, okay, now I have something set. Let me try and use this summer productively. What can I do? And I was like, okay, I had obviously been exposed to some of these online education portals, but I hadn't really fully committed to any of them. I remember there was one day, and I wish I remember the date because it was literally a pivotal day in my life, which was I remember going to udemy.com, and I was like, you know what, like I want to learn this. So I remember typing it in. There's like, I typed one, I do like basic web development or something like HTML, PHP, whatever. And this whole list of results came back. And I was like, wait, there's people out there who want to teach this to me for like $10. And I was so excited. And I remember at that day, I must have bought at least 6 or 7 courses. So I went on
You
a
went on a
shopping
shopping
spree.
spree.
Yeah, I went on a shopping spree for different courses. And I was like, this is amazing. I had basically enough content to last me the whole summer. And that whole summer, I just spent like learning the basics, whatever I could. And it was like the first time this whole world opened up to me, uh, because I'd used technology up until then, but never really seen under the hood. And I remember when the first time I was on a browser and I sort of opened the console and I sort of made it print something or I changed something on, and sort of it was like the first time
The
seeing under the hood.
excitement, yeah.
It was so exciting. And so that happened. And then when I got to Babson, I think first of all, I met some really interesting people, and I continued on my journey of learning technology in whatever way I could. And a part of that learning and meeting people was to go out to these events and make full use of it, because I knew that if I just spent time on the academics on campus, that would not, I would not be taking full, full
Making
use of
use of
the
that entire
whole.
opportunity that you have.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
But I think I missed a step actually. You started learning, you met these people, and I think I won't call this a venture, but the first thing you guys did together with, I think, your co
Yeah,
founders at Wasim and Gabe
yeah,
was you guys starting that code club at
yeah,
Babson.
yeah. So
And
actually, it was. Uh, Yeah, so actually, so many things happened in the first year. I had gotten to Babson, and I was obviously making some friends, and I remember um, telling people. And Babson's really not a technical campus; like barely
yeah,
anyone knows what programming even is, right? So I was like one of the first, very few kids out there. I was like telling people, "Hey, like this is something I've been learning. Like it's interesting," and you know, met some other people who were interested in the idea, hadn't done it much, but were interested in the idea. So that's when I became, friends with the Wasim and
see,
Gabe, who eventually turned out to be, my co-founders in the company. And they also were really into this concept. I remember Wasim was the first one to introduce me to the concept of a hackathon. And I was like, I had never heard of it, but he said it's just 24 hours, you go there and you build something. And that's, as you mentioned, that was my first event, just landed in the US. First month in, I'm in Vegas at a big event, at a hackathon. I know barely anything about computer science, but I'm there and I really saw the thrill of building and solving problems. And a part of that, to sort of bring that back to Babson, we decided, hey, like it would be cool to have a place to do this structurally. And we decided to start Babson's first ever tech club, Babson Code, as part of that. Yeah, and it's still going. So we sort of left a legacy
left a
behind.
legacy. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's pretty great. And so, tell me about the summer where you guys decided to take the next step in terms of, okay, we're doing this coding thing together. Why not, monetize it? start our own startup.
So it was actually it was in the second year, so sophomore year of
Yeah,
college
sophomore
when
year.
we decided, because the first time we went to the hackathon, we barely knew anything, so
Yeah.
we couldn't really gauge, is this something we can even do ourselves? But then we spent that whole year sort of just building up skills, and all of us were learning different aspects. And then it was when we had formed the club, we had created a whole community, and the second time around when we went, that was the time we won the hackathon.
Yeah.
And when we came back, we had this sort of comfort and confidence that, hey, this is something that we actually can do. It's not just it's not a concept. It's we've tried it, we've done it somewhat. We wanted to bring it back and see if we can help people build ideas.
things, yeah.
There's a lot of people who wanted to explore something in this space but didn't know where to begin, didn't really have any sort of guide, because Babson doesn't really have that technical aspect of the education. So we thought this would be great, for us to work together and build interesting products, and along the way meet people who are, building businesses, and hopefully build a network that way. That was sort of the idea. And it was essentially, so we came back from the hackathon October 28th, 2016, and we had registered the company, I think, the next day or something.
That's
So
brilliant.
it was
What did you name the company and why? I mean, I mentioned the name, but I don't think the viewers would have got it.
Sure, yeah. So we went through a bunch of iterations. The initial names were horrible, as every company has.
Yeah.
We eventually landed on Gin, and the name actually was suggested by Wasim, because Gin is the root of the word is an Arabic word, and the original word is spelled with a D that as a prefix, so it's DJINN, and Jinn in sort of, I guess, in that culture is supposed to be like a spirit, a spirit of disruption, in the sense that, and it actually has slightly of a negative connotation. It's like, for example, the way Wasim explained it to us was, let's say you have like a glass of water on the table and it falls over, or something happens, and then I guess colloquially people will say, oh, the Jinn did that. So it's sort of that disruptive, playful spirit, and we combined that
with tech disruptions.
Our translation was disruptive in a positive way. That's the name.
It's a brilliant name. When you told me the explanation, I instantly sort of fell in love with it. That it's genius. Sounded good. But what was that first point where after sort of setting up business, where you guys were like, okay, now this is real. We've started. We got money for this. What was that first project?
The first project was actually we helped a professor with his website, and it was a nutrition professor on campus, Mr. Frederick O.P. I remember our first client, and it was a really cool guy. I was taking his class at the time, and and I think what had happened was he was struggling with something in class, and I remember I think I went up to him and I was like, hey, this is something that would you like me to help you with? And that's when discussion started, and we had just started formulating how could we make this a process, because we had no idea how the software business worked, at least the software services business. So we were just kind of learning, and he was the first client. We helped him build I believe it was a Wix website, I think, and like very basic stuff. At the time, we only knew a little bit, but it was still like basic stuff. So that was, I think, like a $500 project, and that was huge money for us. So
wow,
good stuff.
So that was the first big project, your big breakthrough. Yeah. So I mean, I don't know everything that followed after that, but I do remember, sort of visiting your first office space in near Newbury Street in Boston.
Oh, dude, that was you visited the final office.
Yeah. So I know the first one was sort of in the basement of some dorm or something.
Yeah.
I've been to that as well. So like just sort of take me through the experience, which felt which gave you the satisfaction that, oh shit, okay, now we have our own office, versus, oh shit, we have our big office. Which one was better?
No, to be honest, every step was a really cool milestone for us, because everything was a first. right?
Yeah.
First startup, first intern, first office space, first project. It's like literally everything we were doing was exciting at the time, and we knew that we were doing something that was fun for us, and we were just part of the journey. But yeah, there was a certain point where things became a little more, we realized, okay,
Serious. Yeah.
this is what we're doing. And I think it was when we started maybe doing some of the slightly bigger projects, and we had to figure out, okay, how do we ensure high quality work, while not getting too involved in the operations of it. We wanted to figure out, can we run the business in a way where we're able to build a network of people who can help us build, and we are there to sort of make sure the project happens well. And and, and the main thesis behind the company, we didn't just want to do a software agency, because that is a very traditional business. There's lots of businesses out there that do that, but the
Software
thesis we had
consultant, and
the
then
thesis we had was actually, a couple of things. One was, we realized that the talent is global,
Yeah.
and there's people around the world who have skills. And then we realized that there's a whole suite of productivity tools that are coming up. Slack at the time was sort
Yeah.
of,
The new thing.
becoming,
Yeah.
it was a new thing. People were getting used to it. There's a lot of other tools. Zoom wasn't really a thing back
Yeah.
then. And then we realized, okay, is it possible to build a network of developers and designers around the world who we could bring into our network and build with them? And I think when we started doing that is when we realized, okay, this is something, we're actually building a new concept, and it's not just, here's a project, we spend time coding it and delivering it. It was that the birth of a new concept is when we realized, okay, this is getting serious, and it'll take a lot more work to build this infrastructure. Yeah.
So basically, to break it down into steps, first it was you guys just, doing the projects on your own, coding through the week,
Yeah.
and then delivering them. Then the next step, when you move into a bigger office space, when the size of your projects increases, you guys sort of scaled up your operations in the sense where you created this global talent pool. And
And actually, I would say we realized that we would need people, like, very early on. Because in the first few projects that we did spend time coding, we realized this would be, well, at the time we didn't know as much as well. So for us to deal with so many issues, we would just spend so much time on something that we shouldn't. And
it
I'm
wasn't
someone,
productive, yeah. And it happens, yeah.
someone who's more competent, someone who really knows what they're doing would be able to do a better job. So even early on, we knew that that's something that we wanted to do. Eventually realized, okay, how can we get the highest quality people? So then we started reaching out and building a network. But yeah, it was definitely a journey of realizing how else can we get better delivery and build a better infrastructure.
I think that this is really interesting. The thing you mentioned about being unproductive towards these problems. So just talking about problems and stuff. It's not that you don't think about those problems. It's just that I don't know if this has been your experience. At least it's been my experience. Early on, when I launched, I think in April, my only problems were, fixing the bugs, making sure the bugs were fixed and the users were sort of, enjoying playing on the app. But now the scale of problems has changed. Now it's about, okay, what's my burn rate every month? Okay, when will I need funding? Those sort of things. So, yeah, is this something you relate with? Did you guys also go through something similar, or?
Yeah, I think it's a natural evolution. Is our worries initially used to be, hey, we've got to fix this line of code, right? And then eventually it turned into, hey, we need money for this month to make payment, right? And I think those are two of very different problems, early important in some sense, but definitely very different problems. And yeah, it was an evolution for us. And I think early on we didn't really think of it. We didn't realize what it means to run a business. So we were so engrossed in the actual core of the product building experience. And then eventually we realized, okay, to actually run a company, there's other things you have to think about.
Definitely.
That's what happened to me as well.
So, office 1 basement, office 2 good building on Newbury Street, and then the entire sort of shutting shop fiasco happens.
The saga.
The entire saga. So I mean, it's a pretty long, drawn out saga. I wouldn't want to ruin the rest of your day and take you through that, but just
No.
sort of the key
We'll just take a whole other
takeaways.
episode.
Yeah. So just the sort of key takeaways that during the 2 years you guys ran the company, what were the biggest things you learned from good and bad? First, the good ones.
Yeah. So, well, the good ones definitely would be it pushed us to be uncomfortable with not knowing something, because constantly we would walk into meetings and sort of learn about a new concept, and over time we learned how to carry a conversation even though we might not know the minute details of executing what was discussed. So that's when I realized that it builds a lot of confidence. At least it built a lot of confidence for me to be able to walk into a meeting and project that level of understanding. Yeah, and then go back and do my homework as well. It's not just fake confidence. I would then study up and get better and better. So definitely that level of being able to carry a conversation,
constant improvement,
constantly learning. Yeah, so that was definitely one big positive. Second one would be I would say in terms of a hard skill would be getting much better at collaboration and learning. Well, here's a big plus which I'm still using now, and I think I'll continue using for a long time, is the skill to break down a concept into its what's the word,
bare minimum
individual components, like the first principles of how this concept can be built from the ground up. Because we would get into these meetings with people who had an idea for what they wanted, and a lot of these times most people didn't have the nitty-gritty details of what that means. So someone would sit down and say, hey, like, I'm looking to build a restaurant payment system, or let's say, for example, we had a client that wanted to build a food recommendation engine, and then for food critics and food lovers to be able to get sort of Netflix style recommendation engines. And the process that we learned over time was to take a concept like that, which at surface level is very broad.
It's very broad,
right? But then the skill to ask them pointed questions and say, okay, if we assume this is what you want, what does this mean? What does this mean? How will this happen? How will this happen? Why do you need this? Could you push this? Like, so breaking all of it down into the individual components, because that was a necessary part of the process in terms of the technology. But I think what I'm realizing now more and more is, while at the time we were doing it to get down to the technical understanding, it's actually the same process any good critical thinker has to do. Even trying to understand the business model concept, to be able to probe them, ask the right questions. All of those skills I'm still using. So that was another big plus. And then I would say I think in the sum of all the parts, it was a great positive learning experience. But there was a lot of things that we did wrong that we could have done a lot better. One is
what were the mistakes?
Yeah, well, plenty, right? I think
of course, plenty. But I mean, a lot of them just sort of fall under the same bucket.
Yeah, that's true.
What would be the big ones that sort of taught you?
If I were to give you the big categories, the biggest one would be being very considerate about the people that you work with, and because I think it's very easy to get into discussions with people who want to work with you, and at the beginning everything is really, it feels like everything will work out. But I think now
the honeymoon phase,
the big mistakes we had made was we didn't really feel the level of at least we didn't gauge the level of compatibility in terms of value systems. Right. And because it's not so much, yes, skill of your co-founders and whatever that matters at the end of the day as well, but when you're dealing with situations that are incredibly hard emotionally, you need people who you can
rely on,
confide in. And I think that was the key learning, because some of that dynamics really went wrong. And that was a good learning. The second thing was in terms of, this was more of a hard skill that we lacked at the time, which was finance. Because what, going back to the earlier discussion we were having, which was, how the problems evolve over time. It started with line of code and eventually into how do you make payroll. But
Yeah.
the we never reached the final evolution of that, which is business strategy, and realizing how can we make this a sustainable business in terms of financials. I think we really overlooked that part, and that came back to really hurt us at the end. Understanding what it means to have sustainable cash flows, how to keep cost minimal, how to do accounting the right way, how to do compliance the right way, how to make sure that we understand that the value to cost ratio is really working out, and how do we collect payments from customers and to protect our downside. A lot of those core components we had absolutely no idea about, and
Yeah.
I think we there was also no way for us to know, other than having gone through the process. Because even though I went to business school, I took accounting classes, I took finance classes, unless you're in the situation, it really, like, case studies are different, right? Because
Yeah,
the event
dude.
has
Debit
already
credit
happened.
doesn't come to your mind when you're stressed.
Yeah, no, and I think one of the big differences is that in a case study, the events have
Have
already
already?
happened.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's really easy to analyze in hindsight, but in the moment is when I guess you have to be really cognizant and really self-aware to analyze what's actually happening in the present moment, which we didn't do at the time. That was the other big learning, I would say.
So, sort of to the people who are not just starting off in the field of entrepreneurship, but anything that it is. Let's say they want to get into sports. Let's say they want that dream corporate job. What are some things that you'd suggest that would, help them take that first step?
So I've always let curiosity be my guide. I mean, in everything I do. And I think on a macro level, the curiosity would be, what do you want to do? So, for example, you're saying, let's say someone wants to start a business or get into a sport. The curiosity at the top level is the sport or the business, the concept. So I think most people have that level of curiosity. But I think what's incredibly important after that is to have the curiosity at the lower level, which is, and when time comes to convert this into something actionable. For example, in a sport, it could be the skills that you need to play the game well. In a business, it could be, again, the skills of building a business. In technology, it could be skills of building technology. When it
So
comes up to
basically,
those things,
being obsessed with each and every detail, right
yeah,
from the sport itself in general to what goes into sort of
yeah,
learning each skill, learning everything that there, that's available about the
yeah.
sport.
And it's a journey deeper and deeper. And
Yeah,
I think that you have to learn how to focus, because I think we all want to be generalists and we want to know everything. It's a really hard thing to do. And I think the best we're seeing now, and we see it again and again, it's all about how focused can you get into one thing, because there's so much to learn
yeah,
that you're much better off diving into something that really excites you. Because
yeah.
bottom line is, once you if you get good at one thing, if you get really good at one thing, you're better off than knowing a bunch of other
Being,
things which
yeah,
might have some
okay, shut
holes or
everything
whatever.
else. Yeah, yeah,
And
definitely.
I think that might be another reason for people feeling paralysis of what do I do,
Being
is because they
overwhelmed.
are,
Yeah,
well, because they are at the surface level. And on the surface level, it's the ocean seems immense. Like, there's so
yeah.
many things that I could do. But then once you start diving into things, you say, okay, then you start dealing with the one step at a time. You say, this is my current challenge, then next challenge, then next challenge. It's a lot easier to tackle things that way than to see the whole bunch of things that out in the ether that you have to do. So yeah.
So three things you sort of like to tell self starters or whatever to take care of when they're starting off.
So one, I would say to ask yourself,
Why?
why are you doing this? Yeah. And this is something, actually, I realized the answer, I guess. There's no realizing the answer, but I came up with another reasoning for myself, which I currently believe in as well, is that, and this is a saying that is said a lot, which is sort of, do what you love and you won't feel
Yeah,
like you're working. But I think the way I think about it, is the way I'm going through things now is I'm looking at everything as, like a fun project that I'm embarking on. And then as part of doing that fun project, there's different ways it can manifest. So for example, if 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 one of the fun projects I'm doing is, or for example, let's say I'm interested in the field of for example, technology, right? So say computer science, for example. Now, one way to go around it would be to say, okay, computer science, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to go to school for this. I'm going to do this, this, and that, and sort of plan everything out and know that I'm going to work at this company. And it's like, that's a very specific way of doing it. But then, and this is the path that I used to be on, which is I used to plan out, like if this is the ending of my storyline, I need to walk this path.
Yeah.
And sort of I had created a narrative, which is, I mean,
Which when you reach a crossroads, it's hard to go back to that narrative. Yeah.
Because the moment of decisions,
Yeah.
when you have to deviate from the path, it's like it's horrible to make the decision. And I think it's the good part of looking at things as a journey of working on different projects is you allow yourself the creative freedom to go to take a deviation and then come back to what you were doing, or maybe not. Like I think it's like there needs, in short, the thing I've realized is that have a broader goal in mind, like the things that you want to achieve, the things you want to explore, but don't commit yourself to this particular
fixed
way
path.
of getting there. Yeah.
The end goal matters, but not how you get to the end goal.
Yeah. And I think everyone has a different way of getting
exploring
there, so and which is also probably why actually this is a good segue to the second suggestion, or my experiences, that don't try to emulate someone else's journey, because that again connects back to the first one. Is let's say there's someone who you really look up to, and an entrepreneur, a sports person, whatever, and you might have obsessively read about their story of their life and how they became successful. And I think the biggest mistake there is to think this is the way to get it done and this is the way I shall go through my life. Because then what you're doing is, at that point, you're not even creating your own narrative. You've taken someone else's
adopting someone else's narrative,
sort of a second derivative, and probably even worse than the first one. So and it connects back to the first one again, is that
do what feels right to you. There's no sort of one way to get to the end goal.
Exactly. Yeah. You have an end goal, but just sort of explore, let the path take you where you want to go. And then I think let me see, I would say like another thing would be, the final thing I would suggest is the final thing I would suggest is that take the time to explore different aspects, and because I think what will surprise people is how different things connect and unexpectedly. Like for example, if someone's in college right now, or if someone's sort of doing whatever in their life, go out and do different things, because it's amazing how things tend to connect back. And we say the full circle. I've had so many full circle moments with the things I'm learning, the people I've met. So definitely, so that the more exposure you can give yourself to different experiences, skills, and people, the more of these random connections will form in your brain,
and the more you'll get to sort of learn about yourself.
Yeah, exactly. You get to branch out more and explore more. There's a really good conversation I had with Wasim again a while ago, and this is the reason I'm mentioning this is because it's a great analogy of these 3 points, which is we were just talking about like different philosophies, and how he looks at life versus how I look at life. And at the time, the discussion we had, I was of the opinion that that if there's an end goal in mind, I'll only pick up the skills and things I need to get there, which is the narrative thing. And Wasim was of the opinion that he would just put on a backpack, and then he would be walking on a dirt road, and if he finds a pebble on the side, he'll pick up the pebble, put it in his backpack. If he finds something else, he'll go there and explore what that's like. And I remember at the time I was like, but how will you ever get anywhere, right? You might end up going in circles. But I think he said something along the lines of like, but like that's just how I am. Like he's innately curious. He just wants to explore, and he was like, generally I know where I'm going, so I'll get there. I think, which is, I also sort of agree with him now, looking back. So that sort of summarizes my suggestions, I guess, my advice.
Okay. So, we're sort of towards the end. So I'll ask you this. What sort of impact do you want to have over the next, let's say, 10, 20 years?
So
Not on the world, but, sort of in general, with your life, with anyone.
okay, so this is something that I've thought a lot about, and I think now the way I think about it is that I don't think of it as a function of sort of impact as a function of what I do. I now see it as the the best likelihood of me having any impact on my environment is for me to do things that I'm interested in and things that excite me. So I don't even think of it that way anymore. The way I think of it now is if I just allow myself the creative freedom to do what excites me, somehow or the other, I will have positive impact in the ecosystem or the world around me. So if we had this conversation a year ago, I would have tried to convey sort of an impact and change this about the
Leave
world.
my mark, this, that. Yeah.
Yeah, but now again with the same philosophies, I just looking at things as a fun project, just seeing where my curiosity takes me, and then once I find something that is a project worth committing time to, I'm sure some way or the other positive impact will be created. That's my current life philosophy. So yeah.
What does 0 to 1 mean to you? How would you interpret that?
0 to 1 to me it means two things. It means bravery and clarity. And the what I mean by that is that there's like, okay, so the way I look at 0 to 1 and 1 to, I guess, n is 0 to 1 is that level of it's like looking into chaos and then finding signals and creating something tangible. So something manifests from an unstructured chaos, and those are sort of the disruptive ideas. And that's what I mean by clarity.
Yeah.
And clarity is the part of sort of being observing the world, realizing something new that makes a lot of sense in hindsight, but maybe not at the time. So that level of observational skills, the clarity and the bravery to then implement that. And I think that's why the 0 to 1 concepts have a lot more value delta than the 1 to n.
Exactly.
Because
0 to 1 involves not only you finally getting into execution mode. I mean, this is my interpretation.
Sure.
It involves not only you getting into execution mode, but it also, sort of challenges you emotionally, mentally by forcing you to get out of your comfort zone, by shifting the sort of trajectory of your life.
Yeah.
And just, doing it, just starting with it and not thinking about it anymore. Because the ideation phase of anything, whether you're waiting to, you're just applying for jobs, thinking about applying for jobs, just thinking about, I'll learn this skill, I'll learn programming is like 0. But you actually going to Udemy, buying the course, and then starting that course, that requires dedication, that requires discipline, and that wasn't you until you started doing it. So that's the 0 to 1 change for me.
Absolutely. Yeah. Those that first step. And I think at least for me, curiosity works really well for me to move from any 0 state to 1 state. Curiosity has always been my flip, my switch, I guess. But for someone else, it might be competition. I'm not really that competitive kind of an individual. So for me, it's not the thought of beating someone else that gets me from 0 to 1. For me, it's my own curiosity. So everyone's got their own, I guess, flip
drivers.
Switch, but you have to find that for you.
Perfect. All right, bro. It's been fun. Even I'm learning. So, I mean, I think we did pretty well, but of course we'll have a better one once I'm used to these things, and once you've pretty much gotten a better haircut and shaved your beard.
I'm dressed well, I have a better background, but it's fine, man. It's fine.
But